Welcome back to another edition of Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Chris Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist, and I'm joined today by my friend Charles Payne of Fox News, Fox Business. Charles Payne joined Wall Street, or we got his first job in Wall Street, I believe, in 1985. He started his own firm over 30 years ago, Wall Street Strategies. He started contributing to Fox News in the 2000s, and in 2007 became full-time. He hosts Making Money with Charles Payne, which you can watch every day on Fox Business. And I don't act, this is, a lot of people think this, but having gone through your schedule with you, Charles, how early you get to work and how late you're still going, it might be one of the hardest working people in that building. It's pretty impressive. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Your generous introduction. Yeah, I put in the time. I'm usually, the good news is I usually miss rush hour going in and going home.
I think I've had the most embarrassing temper tantrums of my life alone in a car on the GW bridge. Just alone.
Absolutely.
It makes some bad person out of you. I remember thinking, somebody better be dead. And then I thought, what a horrible thing to think. So GW bridge, avoid it. But Charles, you've been putting out some fantastic monologues, especially as capital. We've seen such a change and such a politicization and an activism that's entered business, and sometimes you've also been speaking for years on the offshoring and the automation and the dangers to the workers and things that are going on with that. You gave a really interesting talk when I reached out to you, a monologue on how this is a lot of this woke capital that we're seeing, a lot of the expenses, a lot of the $1 million checks that are being cut by some of the major players in American business, whether those are going to this activist group or that activist group or this cause or that cause, aren't even rounding errors in their profits, and they're getting a lot of credit, but they're not actually doing things that will help fix communities that are suffering, help fix communities that are broken, really help improve people's lives. An activist might be able to buy 5 houses with that rounding error, but does that help any of the people that are supposed to be helped? I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts on that when we're not as well constrained by television, and what companies, not just what they're doing wrong, but what they could be doing right to help people.
Well, they're checking the box, right, Chris? I think that's the most important thing. This is the corporate virtue signaling, and it does nothing. If you're going to help be part of the issue, right? If you're going to lend your name and your credibility to stoking these flames of anger and saying, hey, yeah, some of these things are legitimate, then you probably should do more than just write a small check. And of course, we're talking about the largest corporations in the world. They employ tens of thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of people. And it is a rounding error. But what they contribute in terms of the public discourse is a lot bigger. So they've got to really take care. If they want to play this game, if they want to play the woke game for whatever reason, because there's a number of reasons why they're doing this. Some are just doing it because it's the thing to do in this new world. 3 letters that are going to become ubiquitous in our society are ESG. A few people have heard of it already. More and more people will. Environmental, social, and governance. It's this new sort of umbrella of behavior that dictates the public world when you're a publicly traded company, and it's extraordinarily powerful. And I cannot underscore. At some point, everyone will know what the ESG is, what the ESG score is. It's still somewhat in its infancy, and the notion is, and we already saw last year, when you had the business roundtable say, okay, we've changed our mind. We're no longer, the role of a company is no longer profits. It's no longer solely the shareholders, but it's society at large. It's the stakeholder, the Chamber of Commerce making an equal sort of having the same sort of epiphany. So now you're indebted. And when you go to work, it's not about how to make a better mousetrap, but how to make a mousetrap that doesn't harm the environment, how to make a mousetrap where everyone who's making the mousetrap are different races and different genders, and the list of those things keep getting longer and longer as well. And so I think there's going to come a point, right now on Wall Street, it's not uncommon for someone to look at a stock and say, what's the PE ratio? What's the price to earnings ratio? It won't be long before they're saying, what's the ESG score? So companies getting ahead of this kind of stuff, and the easiest way to do it in many of these cases is to write a check. Say, hey, look at us. Look what we did. We just wrote a big check to Black Lives Matter We're hip, we're with it, we believe. And then, of course, if you say, well, yeah, by the way, how many black people do you guys have working for you? And then like, oh, hold on one second. And they start to scramble. And, isn't it Larry down in the corner? Well, someone find Mary. Yeah, they start to, I think Goldman Sachs, I just looked at their numbers. 3% in management, like 64 black men out of 13,000 people. So they're at the forefront of all of this. So listen, I think it's a great notion that we want to be better as people, as corporations. I think that's amazing. And I think one thing that businesses inherently know, for the most part, if you want to have longevity, you've got to be better. You've got to make a product that doesn't have a side effect that kills people, right? You got to make a product that's safe for people to use. You've got to make a product that you can continue to make and where you don't deplete a forest so you can no longer make it. I mean, those are simple business decisions that happen to dovetail with the notion of being a good corporate citizen. But the movement, though, Chris, has gone much further left than that. And again, I think one of the more dangerous aspects of this is allowing your name, your reputation to be used in a way that actually makes the public conversation more coarse, that stokes anger, that stokes hatred, that stokes division. And we saw that recently with the Major League Baseball All-Star game in Atlanta.
Yeah, why would you penalize Atlanta? That's one of the top 10 cities in the country to be a black businessman for success rate. More so than Denver, that's for certain.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just, that's the first thing I thought of. I mean, I had so many. My father's buried in Atlanta, right? He retired in Atlanta. My best friend growing up just moved to Atlanta last year. I've got so many people who've been moving there since the 80s for the economic opportunities. And you think about the more successful black businesses, particularly in the 80s, they were all based in and around Atlanta. The notion that somehow you're going to teach this city a lesson, that you're going to teach these Congress people or the state legislature a lesson, by punishing the black people. But I got to be honest with you, so many of these things that from the progressives, so many of their cures punishes black people. Last week, President Biden said he wants to take $3 billion tons of freight off of trucks and put them on rails. Well, you're talking about destroying all union jobs, 40% of which are blacks and Hispanics. They want to pay off college loans, and they put blacks, as this is the reason we want to do it, to help out so-called minorities. Well, 60% will be white folks with PhDs who make six figures or more a year. I mean, so many of the things that they say they're ostensibly doing to protect or help black people actually do the exact opposite, which makes it even more offensive. I am so offended that more black leaders, particularly black progressives, black Democrats, black liberals, don't say, hey, stop using us. Stop using us to promote things like climate change. You can talk about incidents of asthma in the South Bronx, and somehow, the climate is zeroed in on the South Bronx by itself, and it's pounding this one neighborhood. It's carved it out of this whole out of the country, when in fact we know that what happens in these crowded areas, particularly poor areas, that there's a big rat problem, a big roach problem, particularly with the roaches. People can't afford to buy new furniture, so you've got the same, furniture that you bought 10 years ago, 12 years ago, collecting dust mites. All of those things that play a lot bigger role. And if you want to be honest about curing that, I'm down. Let's do it. Let's get rid of the asthma crisis in those places, because it is tough. But don't say it's part of climate change and then use that to pass something else that has zero to do with it. So, Chris, it's so frustrating to watch, because there's some brilliant people out there who know that that the way they sell it is a farce, and it's making the real issues in this country a lot worse than they have to be.
And you see that all the time, especially, Michael Bloomberg, one of the richest people in the world, will go down to Kentucky, or go down to Tennessee, or go down to more so Kentucky, West Virginia, and he'll give a speech, and he's so proud that they shut down that mine. They shut down that coal operation. They shut down this operation. And they say that this to protect the lungs of the children and protect the health of the children in that area. Well, now their dad's unemployed. Now their schools are shut down. Now no one can pay anything. Now and now those kids are really in serious danger because when dad's unemployed and dad has no prospects, it's not always a safe place to be around. There's so much misguidedness. But the kind of what you were describing, oh, and by the way, we'll have to put in the plug here. You said that most products shouldn't kill you, but I personally am a huge fan of chewing tobacco and whiskey. And not just
no. They shouldn't kill you overnight. Long term, it's okay, but not overnight.
Now, describing these companies that really care about their community and give back and more than just profit is kind of describing it seems like a companies of old in America, when companies would care about this country, they would have a patriotic feeling. Companies described themselves as American. If you call up, I mean, outside essentially of the car companies these days, most of them will say, well, I'm a global company. Right. They owe everything that they have to the United States, the freedom of the seas, the freedom to have transit, the technology, what we give them. But they'll say, well, we don't want to offend China, or we don't want to offend France, and we can't say we're an American company because then the French might be mean to us, and they're really quiet. And you also sort of somewhat described a lot of the local stores, the places that, now there's a Walmart there, but there used to be a toy store, a pharmacy, a hardware store. Those places sponsored the sports teams. They really cared. So where in this caring that these corporate people are doing, because some of the things you described sound good. I mean, like you said, I don't want products that kill me. I don't want to destroy the environment. Where are they going so wrong in their social consciousness that they're actually just really hurting people more than they're helping?
I'm not sure that they're going wrong with respect to those things, like, making products that people want. I think businesses inherently do want to make products that do less harm, because you want a customer to buy your chewing tobacco for the next 50 years instead of the next 5 years, right? But you hit on a few things, so I want to try to take them as I think about it. You talk about not wanting to be American or wanting to be global and being afraid to, be proud of your American roots. That's one of the reasons I think we really have seen these corporations become so emboldened as to take on conservative American values to the degree that they have over the last few years. Because when you look at, for instance, Facebook, their growth in America stalled 3 or 4 years ago. But you can take on conservatives because you're going to grow around the rest of the world a lot quicker. Nike, their fastest growth is in China. So who do you worry about offending? 75 million conservatives or 1.5 billion potential Chinese customers? They've made calculated risk. And what they've done is they've decided to be unpatriotic, to forget about their American roots, forget about the fact that if it wasn't for the dollar, they probably couldn't compete in these countries anyway. If it wasn't for the sort of currency beyond just the dollar, but the sort of quality of the currency, the quality of our nation, the safety of our nation, the laws of our nation, having won 2 world wars and saving the entire planet on more than 2 occasions, that they have the ability to germinate these ideas in this country, to build them, to grow them, to improve them, before they take them out to the rest of the world. It is something they should be profoundly proud of, but they are profoundly not ashamed. But they're not worried about this. They're not worried about dissing parts of this country, stoking anger and fear with parts of this country. But they are loath to offend China. They're loath to offend other parts of the world because that's where they're growing. They have maximized their growth in this country, and they no longer care.
Charles, this is something I think a lot of Americans are thinking about, not just even to get off some of the craziness that's going on. The amount of money that we've spent on our government and the amount of money that's into this economy over the past 35 years, over the past year, and is continuing to end. And you get access after your 35 years on Wall Street and in New York and in these markets to a lot of executives and hear what they're thinking. We're curious, where is the inflation? I mean, what should the American people be worried about? Should these housing prices that are flying up, is that just people hedging their bets? I mean, how young people can't buy a house anymore, it seems like what is coming down on our economy that people should be paying attention for and aren't yet?
Well, inflation obviously is a big worry. We saw it with Janet Yellen making just very slight comments about interest rates and that roiling the markets. There's no doubt we already see iron ore prices at the all-time high, lumber prices at all-time highs. We see food commodity prices that have gone through the roof. And this is after a long period of deflation or disinflation imported from these foreign countries where they either don't pay workers, like a place like China, they have damn near slave labor. So we've enjoyed those sort of prices for a long time. I'm concerned about all of the free money out there, but I'm concerned about it not just economically, but from a different point of view as well, Chris. Now, let's talk about all of the money that we've put toward these programs. We know from the federal government, adding in what President Biden would like to do, he'll be north of $6 trillion, and we'll be heading toward $30 trillion in debt. Unemployment benefits alone, February of last year, the federal government spent $25 billion on unemployment benefits. Last month, it was $540 billion. We've done $8 trillion since May of last year in unemployment benefits alone. And in the meantime, we're creating a whole class of young working class people, primarily men, who don't want to work, don't have to work, will never learn work skills. And once this money goes away, will always be behind the eight ball. They'll always be indebted to the political party that promises them more free stuff, instead of saying, hey, we'll create a backdrop where if you can get out there and hustle, you can do extraordinarily well for yourself, certainly far better than just minimum wage. So after we go through this inflationary phase, what I'm really concerned about is when all the checks run out. What happens when you've spent the stimmy checks? What happens when you spent all of the extra unemployment benefits? What happens when you haven't paid your rent in a year and now they say you have to pay it? What happens when they release the eviction notices? Because, we just had a federal judge yesterday saying that it was even illegal for the Center for Disease Control to have that sort of authority to stop landlords from evicting people. I'm really concerned that after this inflation scare, we're going to have something far worse, and it's going to be a deflation scare. And why that's worse? One thing about inflation, when the price of things goes up, outside of food, we just stop buying it. Okay, there's going to be a point where if a pair of sneakers go from 100 to 200 to 300 to 400, and you're not getting free money to buy it, you won't buy it, and the prices start coming down. It typically cures itself after a period of time. Deflation, or it causes those death spirals. If I think a pair of sneakers that cost $200 today will cost $190 tomorrow, and they cost $190 tomorrow, but I think they'll cost $170 the next day, and so on and so on, I am not going to buy them. The price will go into a death spiral. Jobs will go into a death spiral. So after the Federal Reserve has printed up a record amount of money, their balance sheet is headed toward $8 trillion. After the federal government has instituted more welfare programs that will encourage people, particularly young poor women, to have more children so that they get a bigger monthly paycheck without having to work. After all of these things have been embedded into our society, what gets this economy going? So near-term inflation is going to be a tough one to deal with. After that, the sobering process, when it all goes away, I think that's going to be hell.
That's absolutely frightening. I've always thought that the hangover is way worse than the party, with few exceptions. Exactly what you said there. The time to work. I tell people, a lot of folks, when I'm talking to intern classes and this and that, I say, your first couple of jobs are going to pay you very poorly if you want to go into work in Washington, D.C. It's going to be difficult, but here's the good news. Most of you have already made a bunch of very bad life choices, and you decided not to marry your college sweetheart or your high school sweetheart, and now you're here in front of me living with three other men in a one-bedroom apartment with nothing but your beer budget to worry about, no car, maybe one bicycle between you. Now is the time to be poor. Now is the time to work. Now is the time to work 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, have 2 jobs, have 3 jobs, and do what you want to do if you have an option to. It's a great luxury to have that option. Do what you want to do and enjoy your job, because someday you won't have that option. You will need to work. You will need to spend time at home. You'll need to take jobs that pay better, but you don't like as much, because you're going to be responsible to other people, and you're going to have bills, and you're going to be an adult. You're going to have a wife or a husband and kids. And to see these folks who aren't working, to talk to restaurateurs who can't get people to come work for them, no matter how high they raise the money, because they're stay at home, it's so dangerous to their development as a human being, as a member of society. And
exactly.
and I just can't. It's so difficult to fix that. People usually get depressed when they can't work. Even if you don't like your job, you get depressed just sitting at home. This seems like it's a real threat to our youth.
I want to jump in because you just made some fantastic points. And there was a time, Chris, when I grew up in Harlem, I would suspect everybody in my building was getting some food stamps, some more than others. And what would be really interesting is when you would go to the store, and if you're online ready to pay for something and your neighbor walked in, you would actually turn around. You didn't want anyone seeing you using those food stamps, even though we all had them. There was a certain level of dignity, a certain level of pride. Then they introduced the cards, right? So it feels more like a credit card. It doesn't, And then we started this campaign that, hey, don't worry about it. It's not your fault. It's capitalism's fault. And so there's been a public relations campaign toward this very thing, toward the notion that it's not you. Don't even worry about it. You deserve to be at home with a big bowl of Fruit Loops or Cheerios, playing video games all day long until capitalism offers you a job that's worthy of you. Oh, what happened? You dropped out of high school? Doesn't matter. You have no skills? So what? You should be getting higher minimum wage anyway. This has been a public relations campaign. It's not an economic campaign. It's a public relations campaign, and it's worked. It has worked. So, the dignity of work being replaced by the dignity or the notion that, hey, I deserve more, so I'm not working and I'm defiant about it all. And when you were describing, working at the beginning, right? When I got out of the Air Force, I had 2 jobs. I went to college and I was married, and me and my wife and my daughter lived in a room, right? We didn't have a bathroom. We didn't have a kitchen. We lived in a room inside of an apartment that we shared with other people, all 3 of us. And it was smaller than the room I'm doing this broadcast right now. And I got the phone call. I went for an interview at E.F. Hutton. And I got to tell you, I was on pins and needles. When I got the phone call, Chris, one of the top 10 days of my life. I started off at $13,000 a year, and I was proud. I was thrilled. And every day I went to work, I would ask questions. You're right. I was in the right place at the right time. Not the money, but the environment. I was on Wall Street. And, all these people, man, one thing people love is to show off their knowledge, right? They like, well, what's the money supply? Come here, kid. Let me show you. So this is the way this works, that works, this works. By the time I took my test to become a broker, I blew it away. A 6-hour test. I finished in less than 4 hours. Only one person finished before me. And when I walked away, I was singing because I knew I beat it. So it's a stepping stone. The notion of stepping and moving up the ladder, and each rung bringing a different level, not just of economic success, but a certain pride. And you can do that in this country better than anywhere else in the world. And I don't care what kind of weird survey some leftists will show you. There's no other country with better upward mobility than America. We just have to apply ourselves.
That is fantastic, Charles. That's a great story too. My grandfather and my grandmother, when they were married, just out of high school themselves, their eldest son lived in a drawer that they pulled out in their one bedroom. That's where he slept. And when they put that bed down at night, they couldn't shut the door to their apartment in New York. It's a really wonderful story. All of them did very well by working hard. Yeah, I remember that during President Barack Obama's administration, there was a real campaign to get rid of what they call, there's a lot of campaigns to get rid of stigmas, around things that sometimes are just part of real life. But maybe sometimes you ought to. It's not just quite shame and stigma, it's pride and self-respect that makes people not want to talk about it. And they were putting commercials into West Virginia and areas and saying, like, we have to break through this feeling that people have that they shouldn't be on food stamps, or they shouldn't take welfare, that they should have this.
Right.
And I thought that was one of the most sinister government campaigns I'd ever seen, to try and break people down and put them on the dole. I understand that some people really did need help, and neighbors hopefully can reach out to them. Some people really needed help and were afraid to ask. But breaking down pride with government-paid advertising, that seems so un-American to me.
You're 100% right. It just, like I said, but the thing is, it's worked, right? I mean, that's the thing. It really did work. it really went a long way toward now a society where we're talking about universal basic income. The notion that you should simply be paid because you are you and you were born in this country and we owe it to you. So don't worry, don't budge. If you want to look for a job, fine, that's your option. But we're going to make sure you get something every single month because you deserve it. We owe it to you. It's like a Clairol commercial, right? Because you deserve it, right? It's yours for the taking.
This might have some side effects.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's worked. It's working, and we're seeing all these little small areas, but bigger and bigger areas are trying this UBI thing. I think if Andrew Yang wins in New York, we're going to see a gargantuan effort at UBI, and it's we've come a long way from Kennedy, where what do we owe our country? No, it's all about what does the country owe us.
And Charles, you and I have discussed this a little bit in the past. There's a danger coming, and conservatives and Americans, all kinds, need to be ready for it. And it's how far technology is advancing and what automation is going to be able to do. So you hear the old thing where you hear about creative destruction. You say, which is, by the way, supposed to be a critique of capitalism, not a strength of it. You say, well, there's no more horseshoe makers because we switched to automobiles, but the worker was not the horseshoe maker in the age of automation. The worker is the horse. And after the age of the horse and buggy and the end of horse-drawn carriages, there are a lot less horses than there were before. I think it was probably a pretty bad 10 years for horses. But when you've got what automation is threatening to do is not just this job or that job. They're doing programs to do accounting. They're trying to make self-driving cars, just like you talked about earlier, the 30 to 40% of truckers out there who are black or Hispanic, and then all the others. This is cabs. They're starting to put out robot policemen.
Sure.
All of these different jobs, and now some of those jobs are very high skilled, but the first ones to go will be the essentially no skill to low skilled labor. The ones that either you start in or people are proud to work in, at least get a paycheck, that if they screwed up at some point when they were younger, they can figure this out when they get older and they get some brains. But the end of no skill and low skill labor is a real threat because there's not going to be a replacement. We don't need people in warehouses someday. Every time I pull into an airport, a lot of those people are extremely highly trained. I see all the people telling airplanes where to go and moving bags and getting them on and off. And I think every one of these airports, there's a couple hundred jobs that'll be gone in 15 years. Where will they go without universal income? Or are we just going to end up with basically every major city and town looking like Ferguson, just waiting to pop off when something goes wrong with all these people who haven't had jobs for generations?
Some futurists, I want to say Arthur C. Clarke might have put this idea forward, that there should be a point where no one works, where science and automation and robots do all of the work.
Terrifying.
That mankind will be able to pursue loftier things like the evolution of our mind, since we only use a tiny fraction of it. Really, this is what futurists have been saying for a very, very long time. Someone like Andrew Yang acknowledges what you just said. Now, I feel that way too. I think I have natural Luddite instincts. So we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution right now. The prior three, at the end of it, mankind was better off. And there were new jobs that replaced old jobs. It's so hard to see that. I think it was San Francisco, I read on Monday or Tuesday, just let go of their last toll booth collector. It's really hard to see where we're going to have a one-for-one replacement with so many of these jobs. This week, 2 days ago, Lyft reported their earnings or lack of earnings. They're not making money. They say they're going to make money. In fact, they're extraordinarily confident they're going to have a combination of human and robot cars. A lot of these exciting companies can't make a nickel of profit right now until they do that, until they go completely to automation. They said it would be a hybrid, a combination of both. I'm sure it will be 90% robots, 95% robots, and then 10 years from now, there'll be a big party for the last human Lyft driver out there, and it'll be an oddity, and they'll have a party somewhere, and they'll give him or her a gold watch. So I don't know where we make these jobs up, because we could put in sweat equity, right? If you think about the great migration of Black Americans from the South to the North, It was all about being able to put in that sweat equity to go to the factory, the General Motors factory, work the line, and make good money. You would own a home. You would send your kids to college. It was part of the American dream, the American promise. Now a lot of folks are moving back down south, but again, you can't find places to use that sweat equity anymore. And when we talk about teaching our girls the code, I find that to be a very despicable saying, only because, I think it's a great idea, but we're not doing it. Moreover, we keep importing those coding workers. Now, people should know, when you hear Silicon Valley sort of describe these workers and we don't have those skill sets, there are 4 levels to these workers we're bringing in. 4 levels. The bottom 2 are essentially entry-level work. You can be trained on the job to do it, but we still import those jobs. And not every one of these folks are the Michael Jordan of programming, okay? But it's sold that way to us. So that's a million and a half jobs. What they all have in common is they make about 30% less than their native-born counterparts. So we've got this fourth industrial revolution, and we're not bringing up or teaching enough children in this country to be a part of it. The jobs they replace won't be readily replaced by other jobs, like President Biden telling those folks in the Keystone Pipeline to learn how to code. It's insulting and just 1,000% unrealistic. So you say what you're saying is true, and I think on the blueprint or blackboard somewhere in the progressive world headquarters, the idea is that you'll have the Amazons of the world, where there'll be 45 million jobs. 1 million will be humans. Robots will do the rest. Amazon will make $1 gazillion, and they'll split that with the government. Maybe the government will take 3/4 of it. And out of that fraction of money, they'll peel off some and give people as part of universal basic income, additional supplementary pay, whatever it is. I think in their mind, though, this is utopia. This is a utopian world in their mind, and that's where they want to go. They think that's a good place.
That's a very, very frightening future, because I probably, you and I might agree on this, as opposed to evolving the mind, I think most people just smoke pot and play video games.
Although some would say that's evolving the mind.
And even if you drive through parts of Pennsylvania and you're trying to get off the highway to get something to eat, you sometimes don't interact with the human waiter unless you sit at the bar. It's machines that you plug this stuff into. COVID's pushed that. I think someday a human bartender will be a luxury thing. Like, wow, the Ritz-Carlton, there's a human bartender there. And it'll be something that is very nice to have that special touch. And, the industrial revolutions you're talking about, what really makes it so dangerous is that there was a time, and it was extreme. It caused a lot of upheaval and unhappiness and destroyed a lot of families, where sons could no longer stay on the land and daughters could no longer stay on the land because it was untenable and they had to go to the city. Well, the farm petered out. There's just too many of them. Now we're seeing those kind of changes happen 1, 2, 3 times in one person's life cycle, that their job, that's obsolete anymore. We don't do that. People who went to college to become accountants in 2010, when they absolutely are still doing, are already, if they're good enough, training their Indian counterparts to do the jobs where people are laid off around them. I think that this is coming very rapidly. It's going to be more and more difficult, exactly like you said, for Americans to cope with this without some massive upheaval.
Massive upheaval that can only be tamped down with massive check writing, and it's just. And again, I don't think, I don't want us to sound like a couple of guys like yelling at people to get off our porch, right? I mean,
with Kane with the tennis ball.
Yeah. But I do believe that it's being that we're taking a ham-fisted approach that does not focus on the needs of Americans or the ability of Americans to at least capitalize. If indeed this is where we're going, and we know it is, we should be positioning our children to capitalize. When President Biden talks, for instance, about free community college, I want to scream. I really want to scream. In 8th grade, I was looking at the New York City educational stats, New York for 2019. 8th grades for Black students in 8th grade, 26%, I think, are efficient at math, maybe 25% at reading. And at fourth grade, the numbers might be even lower. Now, here's the irony, Chris. Those same black students who go to charter schools are over 50%. So these are the same people. They have the same basic intellect, but one group is given a tougher curriculum. One group is told, we expect more of you. One group is told, hey, we know you can do the work. So for these other kids who have gone through public school, and then you add on what we just gone through in the last year, where these same cities have been so ham-fisted with their shutdowns and keeping schools closed, that so-called achievement gap that can be 2 or 3 years is now going to be 4 or 5 years. And you're going to put these kids and young adults later into community college. Why? They're not going to be prepared for it. They're going to be embarrassed. They're going to walk into the classroom and not know what the teacher's talking about. This is how you're helping people? This is how free community college helps people? Or you're going to do something else on the other end when you put them in a government Head Start program that doesn't work? You know, unless we demand more from our youth and we believe, get rid of the bigotry of low expectations, particularly in these progressive cities, all of these other things mean nothing. And if you tell me, well, we'll make it up to you later by higher minimum wage, by public housing, we'll get you above the poverty line. My answer is I'm still at the bottom, no matter how you measure it. So if you measure it from $10 an hour to $15, I'm still making the least. If you measure it that I'm renting or I've got one of these crappy public houses, I'm still living in the worst conditions. No matter how you measure it, you can move the poverty line. That's an artificial line, right? I mean, the poverty line outside of America is $2,000 a year. You can move that number anywhere. The fact of the matter is I'm still the poorest. And this is the Faustian deal that you're asking me to vote for. And sadly, too often I did as Americans. This is what we're willing to accept. And we got away with it in the past. Where people say, well, we did it before. We did it in the 50s. After World War II, there was no other game in town. Japan was in rubble. Europe was all in rubble. We were the only country that came out of that war essentially unscathed. America's percentage of global GDP peaked in the 1950s. It's different now. We can't afford these mistakes. There's no sweat equity job that's going to be able to help someone who has a limited education. Now's the time for us to decide as a nation, do we want to remain on top? And if we do, we need to ask every citizen, we need to go to every single kid going to their first time in school and let them know you're going to get a tough curriculum because we know you can do the job. And we want you to have a job when you get out of high school or go to college.
And that makes such a difference in lives, because you could be born with certain skills and certain talents, but you really need, that nurture. There are so many teachers, or I can remember very specific ones, who had such an impact on my life, and I listened to them. And sometimes I spent a lot of time in detention or in the hallway or getting kicked out of school, but they were hard on me, and I came back and they cared. And there were so many other people I saw. I had parents who were tough on me and cared about me, and there's a lot of my peers who didn't. And you started to see that, because they could have been very successful in something. They needed to get knocked around a little bit, but they weren't, and they didn't have that discipline, and they lost it. But Charles, I know that you've got a hard break, and you've already been working a long hour today alone. So thank you so much for joining us here at the Federalist. And folks, if you want to catch more of Charles Payne, you can catch him on Fox Business on his show, Making Money with Charles Payne, also on Fox News. And where else can they follow you on social media or on email, Charles?
CV Payne on Twitter. Also, I write every single day about the market, and my market commentary is free if you go to wstreet.com. And Chris, I do want to say I'm sorry that they had those tough rules against chewing tobacco in elementary school, but you made it anyway. So, and I agree with you. Listen, Mr. Austin and Mrs. Flood, my 4th and 7th grade teachers, I love them. They did so much for me. And you're right. Let's bring out the potential, because God gives us all gifts. Let's allow each other to develop those gifts, particularly as a country.
God bless that. God bless America, Charles. It was great to talk to you.
You too, my man.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. And until next time, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the free.